we will roll. All right. Thank you. All right, great. Uh, Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the North Miami Board of Adjustment, March 20th, 2019. And we're calling the meeting to order. It is 6:38, and we will, if everyone could stand. And Holly, you haven't been here for a while, so you could lead us in the pledge.
Okay.
Okay.
I even know this one.
To
I pledge allegiance
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And may we have roll call, please?
Ms. Philippi,
Oh, she's not here. Here.
Ms. Hill,
I'm waiting for her.
Here.
Mr. Medingme,
Here?
Ms. Cohen,
here.
Dr. Arnold.
Present.
We have quorum.
Wonderful. And since you have the mic, Mr. Cook, if you can just give the audience a little explanation of the whole process.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's going to be our attorney.
Hello.
I'm sorry.
Good evening. So this is a notice about public hearings. Please be advised that the following items on the agenda are quasi-judicial in nature. The applicant or duly authorized agent for the applicant must be present. If no representative is present, the application will be tabled to the next Board of Adjustment meeting. When the petition is announced, the applicant or his or her agent shall approach the microphone and state his or her name and address for the record. Any interested party wishing to speak on any item may approach the podium after the board has opened the public hearing. Each party shall approach the microphone and state his or her name and address for the record, and shall address his or her comments to the board. Each party shall speak for not more than 2 minutes in order to provide for order and time for other interested parties to address their concerns or comments to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that being said, anyone who will be speaking on any matters tonight needs to take the oath, so, which will be administered by our attorney, so.
Sure. So whoever's going to be speaking to the board, please stand and raise your right hand, including staff. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any amendments to the agenda?
No, ma'am.
Okay, with that said, I know it's been a while, so I am asking my colleagues, we need to approve the minutes from December 19.
So moved?
Second?
Thank you, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right. I see, oh, that's new. Should we table that to the Board of Adjustment Timeline 2019? We want to do that under new business?
Madam Chair, that's just the a calendar for the year
Oh,
you should be looking at, that you have in your packet.
yeah, I saw.
So that's to make you aware of the meetings that we have scheduled for this year, so you can have them on your schedule.
Okay, so, guys, take it home, post it on the refrigerator, so that we know about our meetings, okay? So, that's just for information, okay? Communications, board members, any communication?
No.
Okay, so with that, okay, and with that, we will start with our first case, which is V-0219, a variance to Article 4, and that is, let me see, I'm trying to get the address here. Thank you. 2210 Northeast 121st Street. Thank you. What did I do with my paper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As stated, this is a variance to allow a deviation in the rear setbacks for a single-family residence. The variance, as was stated, is to allow the deviation of the required setback, minimum required setback of 25 feet to be reduced to 18 feet 9 inches for the property located at 2210 Northeast 121st Street. As you can see here, it is an aerial map of the location. This is located in the Sans Souci location of the city on the east side of our wonderful city here. Property is approximately 8,200 square feet. As you can see, these are the zones that are encompassing the location. All around it is low-density residential and single families, pretty much. This slide is illustrating the setback based on the request from the applicant. What they are doing is adding an addition to the rear of the house that encompasses an office and a family room and a restroom area. To give you a little background behind this, for full disclosure, the applicant has submitted administrative variance to the city, and on the application it said 25% that you could deviate by administrative variance. But our code clearly said 20%, and when we had that error, we said, well, we will let you continue on forward and go before the Board of Adjustment for this deviation and accommodate them in that manner. So because they had produced plans and everything with the anticipation that they would be able to achieve this 25%. So, as the code is, you have several criteria that you would have to meet to be able to attain a variance. This is true whether it's administrative variance or a Board of Adjustment variance. And number one you have is, are there any special conditions or circumstances that are associated with this deviation? In our opinion, there are no special circumstances or conditions associated with the site. Also, one of the criteria are there unusual circumstances or conditions necessitating the variance? We say again, no, there are no unusual circumstances that necessitate this variance at all. Number three we looked at is, are there any, is the request anything like, that is unique to maintain the intent of the code? So when we looked at that one, we look at, hey, it's a single family residence, it's in a single family area, and what they're doing to deviate from the code will not take them out of being a single family home. It's just dealing with the setback and deviation that. So in that aspect, we do not believe that, we believe that it does meet that criteria, that it meets the intent of our code, and it does not have any adverse effect on the appearance of the city. Number four is deliberate interpretation of this provision of the LDRs. Would it deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the area? Now, some people say this is kind of up in the air about that, but when you look at the context of the area, you would say that by not allowing her this and her husband this deviation, it will deny them of rights that are occurring already within the area. So let me move forward so you can see what I'm speaking of. These are pictures of the back alleyway where they are showing the residents and their residents right there. And if you look at the overview here, this overview shows you that you have people who are deviating from that 25%, 25 feet setback to the east of them and to the west of them. And if you look on the south side of the property, of that alleyway, you see that most of the houses on the south side are deviating. So when you look at that context, by allowing them to have this deviation from the 25 feet, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary there. It would actually be in coherent with what's going on right there in the immediate neighborhood. Number 5, the variance request is a minimum variance that will make it possible for a reasonable use of the land and structure of the building. We would say, yes, this is a reasonable variance to allow them to utilize their property. And number 6 is the granting of the variance in harmony with the general intent and the area and stuff like that. As I've showed you with that overview of the area, it would be in harmony with what's going on in the neighborhood right there, so it would not have any adverse impact to the area. So thus, with that, we believe it would be our recommendation to approve this variance request by the applicant.
Thank you. And is the applicant present? You can come forward if you have anything to add.
Paul Progakis, architect. What we're talking about is a 1.3 incursion into the allowable rear setback. Not really that much in comparison to the other things that are going on there. It was purely circumstantial when we began the design. We talked about the project program, what we wanted to include in things, and we found that there was an opportunity, if an administrative variance was possible. Clients came to the city, received a paper that told them what it was. It seemed something that was reasonable in other communities. 25% is allowable. It cited the passage in the code, and I followed that. So the net result was a lot of work that was done, some desires that were met, and we've encroached a 1.3. And that's all we're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That's it? Okay. With that said, anyone for or against this item, you may come forward. I'll open public hearing.
Good evening, William Prevotel, 11950 North Bay Shore Drive. I'm not too sure if I've ever been to any hearing here at the City of North Miami in the last 20 years that has been of such a minor significance, the 1 foot 3 inches. It's really quite remarkable even to be here. But as a member of that particular neighborhood, I know that we don't always have a lot of support. I would like to come up here and show some support for this project. I think it's very well intended. I think these are people that are looking to make an investment in our community as opposed to just neglect it. I think the use, the individual use within that space will be great. It will improve that particular property, of which they will pay for and we will receive extra tax from down the line. It will improve the neighboring properties and their values as well, and therefore improve the value of the city. So I wholly endorse or request that you pass this request as it is. As a little side note, if I may, I was here, and it is directly and indirectly related to our hearing last time, where all of us met, and we didn't quite have, we had a majority, but not a quorum. And I know that nobody here set those rules, and everybody here followed those rules. But there's something about the logic of that that doesn't quite sit well. The fact that we had not just city staff and the price that that costs the city, but also our volunteer, commissioners that have taken their time to, not only arrive and the transportation and to be up there, but there's a great deal of time and effort. And to, rather than abuse that, I wish there was some mechanism that, I know we cannot mandate that, but we can maybe influence somebody else on the city council or somewhere up the line, that if we're in a situation like this last month, sorry about that, I'll do it quickly, that if we have a quorum, if we have, not a quorum, but a majority, that could then be given as a choice to the people who are applying on a case by case. If you have three, each of them would be able to say if they could or not, if they'd like to or not, be heard by the majority. So therefore, if they say, no, we want to wait for a quorum, that would still be in place. But maybe there's some mechanism so that we do not abuse everyone's time and the applicants as well. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you for considering this item.
Duly noted, Mr. Prevotel. So our attorney, and as you said, it's really city council. It's who appoints and who decides. Okay. All right, anyone else? Okay, public hearing's closed. Board discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to motion to approve the item.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. McDermott and seconded by Ms. Hill. Okay,
Hill.
Ms. Hill. All right, excuse me, roll call, please.
Ms. Philippe,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McDermott,
Yes.
Ms. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen.
Okay.
Motion has been passed 5-0.
Great.
Enjoy.
Happy building.
Go out and build.
And I'm glad that you're getting a bathroom where it's not next to a bedroom. Yeah, I don't want people going in my bedroom. All right, next case. Case
You should explain how we're
V
gonna do it.
dash 419. And do you suggest that we do them one at a time?
Mr. Cook can also mention, but we discussed calling them all
Okay,
at the same time, but and having one
discussion.
consolidated hearing, and you
Okay.
would vote on them separately at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so V dash 4-19, variance to deviate from required setback. V dash 5-19, variance to deviate from required distance separation. And V dash 3-19, special exception to deviate from maximum height restriction. And the location address is 655 Northwest 135th Street, whereabout. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As stated, we have three items before you that is specifically specific to a cell tower that is existing within the city. To give you some background on this item, what had transpired is it looks like that we had went through the building permitting process with this tower, and when it originally went through to be erected, it was not filtered through one of the disciplines that was critical, the zoning office. So it was erected without us making any input on that. So with that, you had a tower that was erected that was higher than what is allowed for a single user provider, which is 90 feet, and they are at 120 feet. So when we became aware of this is when the applicant was wanting to augment the tower to add a new apparatus to it. And when that happened, it was routed through zoning, and at that time, we recognized this deviation in the code. So to cure this matter, you had the situation where we had put it on the agenda believing it was for, you needed a variance. With further investigation within the code clearly states in the telecommunication area, specific at section 5-1806, that you can deviate from areas of the telecommunication tower as it relates to 18-1803 to 5-1805. Within those criterias, one of the deviations that you can meet is the height deviation through the exception. So with that exception, there are several criterias that you need to meet to be able to achieve this exception. One of them, as you had mentioned, is that you need to have a minimum separation from a single-family use or duplex use of at least 500 feet. The applicant in this specific situation is only 333 feet from the closest single-family or duplex use. The caveat to that is that this is located on the east side of I-95, so you have a huge barrier that separates them. The other criteria that you would need to meet is that you have to have a minimum of 110% of the height of the tower from any property line. So the applicant does not achieve that. And when I go further into my presentation, I believe we'll present the difficulty for someone to even meet that criteria when you are placing something within the right-of-way, as we know. So that's how we have got to this situation. So with that in mind, I think it's incumbent upon us to first speak towards the special exception, because the special exception is what's allowing the deviation in height, and the special exception is what's triggering the two variances that they also need. So we have a special exception pursuant to Article 5, Division 1, 5-1803, which is dealing with the height, .12, and it's really being allowed through Section 5-1806 in this area that allows for you to do the special exception to deviate from that height. So within that criteria, you had, as you can see right here, you have the location. To be a little clearer, this is located in the right-of-way of Northwest 6th Court. It's on the west side of 6th Court as you come off of 95. There's an exit off of 95. You go past Opelika Boulevard. You go past that location, and the next intersection will be 135th Street.
Currently an empty lot.
And it's right there. So if you can see it in the, over here, right there. So what you have is you still have within this special exception, you have several criteria that the applicant would need to meet to be able to have a positive recommendation for approval. So the first, let's move to it, have a look. This is an overview of the area to give you a location of the map. As you can see in the pink there, you have the tower indicated. Right there's the dot. You see all of the commercial area around it. You see I-95 to the east of the location, and then on further to the east, you see the single-family residential use. Now, one would think with it being so close to Northwest 7th Avenue, that would be the west side, they would be close to residential. Surprisingly not. It's even the closest residential use is significantly away, about 600, 700 feet as the crow flies from that location. I was surprised, frankly, and it's not even residential zone, it's a residential use, and that was the closest one to them. But as you can see to the east, they are within that 500-foot radius. As stated, what the special exception is dealing with the deviation in the height. As you can see, you have the tower here. The tower is allowed to be 90 feet by right for a single provider user. They are at 120 feet, and you need a special exception. Or another mechanism that they could add another user to the site, and that would alleviate the need for the special exception. So, one of the criteria that we looked at is the use of special exception in the district. Yes, the use that they are requesting is a special exception. Special exception, to reiterate and be somewhat redundant, is that they need a deviation from the height from 90 to 120. Is there appropriate provisions for access for the facility adequate for traffic and stuff like that? This is within the right-of-way. So there is access there. So I move back and let you look at that. Look at it. You have somewhat of a road there. If you would be familiar with the site, as you're traveling west on 135th, there is a curb cut that is actually northwest 136 that takes you past the site and actually takes you to Northwest 3rd Court right there. And you also have a little area where you can actually go on to the location of the right-of-way where the actual tower is located. Now, are there adequate parking areas and off-street truck loading and stuff like that? For me, I felt that this was not applicable for this specific use. This is in the right-of-way. These are not items that you would have in a right-of-way. There exists adequate room that if a maintenance truck needed to come over there and do something work there, that they could park without interrupting the right-of-way in any kind of way. I was there on more than one occasion. There's not any problem even accessing the site. Are there suitable landscaping or fencing along the lot and rear? Again, I think to the unique nature of the site, it would be something that I would say that they need landscaping there. I do have in the conditions that they need to have a fence around it, around the site, and maybe the applicant can speak to if that's applicable for it, but that is one of the requirements, to have a fence around it. Why? To prevent people, which, you know, people would do, they'd climb the fence anyway, but at least we can say we have done our due diligence to do something to deter anyone going over there and accessing it, climbing it, and doing whatever people may do. Is the proposed special exception reasonable in terms of logic, efficient, and economical extension of the public services? I say yes. All basic public services and facilities are readily available and provided to this tower site. And I would say, in addition, the tower site is a public service in some instances. If you look at it, that it's providing for cell use to be adequate within our area and helps with preventing disruption in the cell use in that capacity. Will the proposed special exception constitute an adequate use in the area and will substantially injure or deter the use of the surrounding properties or from the character of the neighborhood? I would say, yes, it does not do that. Go into the full breadth. The telecommunication tower exists within the northwest 6 court right-of-way and is nestled among commercial uses. And even though the tower is not located 500 feet from the single-family resident, you do have the I-95 interstate that serves as a tangible buffer between the residential use and the tower itself. Then you have, is there a separation of 300 feet from other residential? It's just a separation of 300 feet, as I state, 333 feet to be specific, from the closest residential. Therefore, the proposed special exception to allow the tower exceeds the maximum allowed height of a single family as a single use, as I said, from the 90 to 120, and that it states that the tower resides in a site that is commercially buffered, it's a vacant lot. You have I-95 to the east of it. The granting of this special exception constitutes an appropriate use for that area and will not be injurious or to the surrounding properties or the characteristics of the area. That said, I recommend approval of this request with several conditions. Would you like for me to read all of them into the record? I think a couple of them are important that we need to state on record. One is they need a lease agreement with the city. And that lease agreement, that's condition number one. That lease agreement needs to be executed within 45 working days from the date of this proceeding, if you so choose to grant this special exception. And that would be on or before May the 22nd of this year. Other caveats that I would like to bring to your attention is that the applicant needs to fulfill all conditions within 6 months of the date of this proceeding. And why, based with the consultation with the Board of Adjustment attorney, Mr. Hill, we feel that we need to do this because we already have this erected. And we need to have something in some kind of caveat to help them get all the conditions. Normally what would happen is that if it wasn't already erected, they would have to be within 6 months, within a year, they would need to execute a building permit and do all these things and go through it. But we don't have any to tie them to. And then they could seek an extension for 6 months if they wasn't able to achieve the building permit within that year's time of getting their approval. So we believe that we need to put this caveat there to enforce them to meet all our conditions within a 6 month period. Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Cook, since you said it's already erected,
Yes.
do you know about when? That's a reason for my question.
From my investigation, and the applicant can speak specifically to that, it looks like it happened around, if I'm correct, 2015, maybe around that. Excuse me, Mike, if you would, Mr. Walker. Yes.
Hello,
Hi.
Michael Walker.
Uh-huh.
On behalf of Mobility, 120 South Riverside, Chicago, Illinois. It was permitted in late 2016, and it was constructed in March of 2017.
Okay.
And then inspected shortly thereafter.
Just for the record, and
Yes.
I don't know if you gave address. I know you stated your name, but
Yep, 120 South Riverside.
Okay,
Chicago,
thank you,
Illinois.
I'm sorry.
Can we clarify, are you an employee of the company or an
Yes.
attorney for the company?
I am an employee of the company. I am the government relations director for Mobility, and I have the lobbyist registration taken care of. So,
Okay. And my next question, is this the only tower in that area? Because it's just a confusion for me. Is this the only communication tower in that corridor?
I cannot 100% say no. I do know we have a minimum 1 mile separation requirement from my,
No, that's not the reason, because, as I said at the beginning, I've been on this board too long, and I know that there's probably another tower that has more than one entity, like they're either T-Mobile along with some other things on there. And that's what I was referring to, because I know there was something that existed before that came to the board, and that was years ago. So,
Madam Chair?
for disclosure with that, Madam Chair, this is a Sprint operated mobile tower here and a single provider.
Madam Chair,
yes, sir.
a question to Derek? I'm a little confused. If it's already there, how did it get there without going through the machinations that we're going through now? I mean, there's obvious things that we're being asked to make special exception for, but it's like, how did it get there to begin with? Why are we going backwards? It's like closing the barn door after the horse is out.
So let me give a little more history and go back through it again.
Okay.
And Mr. Medina may forgive me for not being clear earlier. So, as I understand it, when they originally came through, as Mr. Walker indicated, they had got their building permit in 2016. At that time, when it came through the building permitting process, if it would have been routed to the zoning, we should have caught it and said, oh, you need to, A, you can't be this high, and B, you need to do these conditions that we have listed associated with this exception. Since it was not routed through us, these things were not done. So they got their building permit. I would presume that the applicant wasn't aware that these items needed to take place. A, you need to have a lease agreement, bond, and other things at that time. I'm gonna be quiet and I'm gonna defer to Ms. Warner because she had something she brought to my attention. If you feel like stating, no.
No?
So that is what
Chair.
took place in that
And I
aspect.
think our attorney may have
Mr. Hill?
something.
So apparently there are additional approvals that are required from the city council that were not obtained, one of which is the lease that has been discussed. Also, there's a requirement to obtain a permit for the siting of a tower, and that's in section 5-1803A, which is something that's also going to require application to the city council, which was not done. But all of this stemmed apparently from the issuance of a building permit and other reviews not happening.
So now we're catching up to make it all
Right.
right.
So it's one
Okay.
hand not
Yes.
knowing what
If
the
we
other's
were,
doing.
the issue is, at this point in time, if we were to deny these special exceptions, he'd be in a lot of trouble because he'd have to be taking, I mean,
Yeah.
in other words,
And your cell phones
we're
won't
in the
work.
point of saying if we don't approve these, he's gonna have to take the tower down. So,
The presumption is that a person doing business in the city is knowledgeable, or it has an obligation to make themselves knowledgeable of the applicable law, and that they did not comply is their responsibility and not something that we are responsible for.
So how
well, I
is
know,
it-
I understand that, but from the sake of fairness.
Well, just to have it said in the record.
Yeah, I mean, we,
But how
So-
is it that there's no lease? What are they?
Well, it hasn't been done.
How are you
So they
paying for
haven't
the
been
land?
paying for the land?
So, if I may interject, Ms. Hill, the lease agreement is the apparatus that we use for having the tower within our right of way or on city property.
Is it city property?
The right of way is considered city property. Yes.
And is this tower functioning right now?
It is not, no.
Has it ever
No?
functioned? Okay, so it's never functioned since it's been erected. And have you ever paid any money to the city of North Miami for compensation for using the land?
No, and that's the purpose of the agreement. It's also worth noting that this is in the right-of-way, so it is a unique situation, and that's why this, I think a lot of this was
Okay.
missed.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, it's something that was brought up, as what Mr. McDermott brought up and others, that I say if you deemed it that you would not approve this exception, there's a caveat, you're overusing it in the LDRs that allow through the lease agreement that the city manager can waive items. He can waive the requirement of the 90 feet. He can waive the setback requirement through the lease agreement. So they do have that. But I think it was incumbent in this situation that it go through this process and have the public hearing and be approved if you so deem it within your wisdom to do so. And then we catch all these other items that need to be done to fix it.
I get you. I understand. And
Here we are.
So council, as I understand it, after it leaves us, it's going to the city council, basically, to work out all these other lease agreements and et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct? Am I correct in? Jennifer?
So, in the lengthy list of conditions for approval, there are a checklist of items. 2 of those items we anticipate will have to go to mayor and council for approval. One will be approval for the execution of the lease agreement. That will require council approval. And I believe the other requirement that will be added as a condition is the after-the-fact siting application for the tower, and that also will have to be approved by mayor and council. But that's just 2 of the lengthy checklist of items that they have to comply with.
okay. All right. Mr. Cook, are you done with your presentation?
So to piggyback on what Ms. Warren was saying, we have additional conditions. One was the 6 months that they need to execute these items. Number 14 is they need to get a site permit, which is through Section 5-1803, that they need to go to City Council to get a permit to actually be where they are. Of course, as we all have established, this is after the fact process, but we're trying to do the proverbial cross our T's and dot our I's at this stage.
Okay. All right.
So just to comment on, so the city would be wearing 2 hats. One is in its proprietary capacity, it's going to be requesting a lease, and in its regulatory
Landowner.
capacity, it's going to be getting the permit or reviewing the permit for the siting. So that even though they're both going to city council, it's sort of like there's 2 hats that the council would be wearing to accomplish that.
Okay.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry.
no,
Madam Chair?
it's really time to let the applicant, if he has anything else to add.
Just one additional thing. The conditions that are stated in the memo for the height special exception would also apply to the other 2 requests. Even though they're not specifically stated in the other memo, we're incorporating them by reference.
Okay.
Yes.
The height. 90
No,
to
it would
100.
have to be 90, but this one's
90.
120, and that's why they're asking for the
But
variance.
it's a special exception,
Yeah.
requesting,
There's
instead of
one
90 to
tower.
412.
So, Madam Chair, forgive me, do you want me to go through the variances also at this stage? Because I've just talked specific to the special exception.
Yeah. let's do
Okay,
everything.
so, Mr. Walker, I'm gonna move forward. So, through you, Madam Chair.
No,
your
go ahead.
direction. So, as we have established, you have the special exception that is needed
Okay.
for the height deviation. And with that, as I stated earlier, we have the 2 variances that are associated with that height deviation. A, as we stated, you have the separation from the single-family duplex, which needs to be a minimum of 500 feet. They have seeking a variance to allow for 333 feet. We have a separation between that tower and the closest residential use of the I-95 thoroughfare, which is a notable barrier between them and that residence. And the second variance that we have is for the setback from any property line. So in that vein, if you think of it, if I have erected something in the right-of-way, the very essence of a right-of-way is to allow access to property. So you're going to be abutting property lines. You're not going to be able to achieve a setback of 110% of the height of the tower in most cases from any property line if you are erecting it within the right-of-way. So, in a nutshell, you have 6 criteria for each one that they need to meet, and you need to achieve 4 of the 6. So, as you have it, we have for the first one dealing with the special conditions, we say yes. As you're dealing with the setback, as I told you, the setback is a special condition in the right-of-way. It's just seemingly almost unlikely to be able to achieve that setback when you're dealing with that. And you're dealing with the distance separations. As I stated with that, you have the distance separation. They're not achieving it, but they have the separation of the highway that is a clear barrier to any interference or any concerns that it may have as impacting the adversely of the single-family uses there because of that separation. Number 2 is the unusual circumstances and conditions. No. Even though you have the criteria that they went through this and didn't get the building permit, it's still no unusual. The distance separation, you would say it is somewhat a usual circumstance in that you have that separation, that barrier. That barrier would be, for me, it meets the intent of what we are trying to achieve by having a 500-foot separation between a tower and a single-family use. 3 is the requested variance maintain the basic intent and the purpose of these regulations. I would say no, as it relates to the setback. And why I say that, the purpose of that setback is to allow for separation for any use or structure that it would be abutting. So in this say they want 110% of the width of the length, which would be 132 feet. In this aspect, if you was doing the standard property, then you would want it that far away because you wouldn't want to have an adverse impact on the neighbor that they have in their use. So I say no. But again, I say for the distance separation, yes, it does meet that intent. As I said earlier, because that natural barrier, it serves to meet the intent of what we are trying to do with that 500 feet. Number 4 is the literal interpretation of this provision of the area yard to deprive the applicant of their rights. We say yes, it would. As it relates to the setback, as I said earlier, it's in the right-of-way. It's just very unlikely that you'll be able to achieve that setback when you erecting something in the right-of-way. No, when you talk about the distance separation component. Number 5 is the variance request, the minimum variance that will make it possible, yes, on both occasions because of the specific circumstances of this site. And number 3 is the granting of this variance in harmony with the general intent and purpose of the LERs. I would say again, yes, in both aspects as I established. A, being in the right-of-way, it's impossible to meet that. It's the ideal location to have something like this rather than in the middle of a residential area or in the excuse me. And the distance separation is always stated. It is at 333 feet, and you also have the barrier of I-95 there. And as Mr. Helm said, that the conditions that we have established as associated with this special exception also applies for the variances request here. And we request that we recommend approval of the special exception and the 2 variances.
Thank Mr. Finnegan?
Mr. Walker, I'm here on behalf.
Mr. Walker, okay.
So thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Cook, for the great presentation. I don't think I could do it as eloquently as Mr. Cook. So I will keep it brief in respect for your time. I really do appreciate, again, the amount of collaboration that there has been with city staff throughout all of this. This has been a learning experience for us as well. The nature of this being in the right-of-way and trying to bring data to the people of North Miami. There is a couple points I do want to point out here. So the 120 foot for the single user, there's a considerable need for coverage and capacity in this very particular area. It is right next to the I-95, as well as a lot of folks getting on and off the interstates and traveling through town, as well as residents. So there is a need for not just one carrier. There is an opportunity for multiple uses and carriers on this pole. We have structural analyses that do show that there is sufficient capacity for additional uses. So co-location is an opportunity. Obviously, we wouldn't be adding to the height, but that would also bring us into the permitted use of the 120 foot. The other point is with the row, just being the row, the right of way. The setback requirements, it's very difficult to apply to the right of way. If you can see that there is, right down the street, there are very large transmission lines that are the same size and height as our facility, as well as I think FDOT has equipment as well right along the interstate there. So with the elevated interstate corridor going through there, there's also sound barriers. I just jumped out of the car today. I was just kind of walking around on the other side where the residential is, and you can't see the tip of our facility from the corner, but the sound barrier blocks it when you walk through. Now, I'm not going to trespass, so I didn't want to get too far into their lot, but that is blocked by the sound barrier. And now, we did work with staff to get this permitted in late 2016. Obviously, it wasn't everything that was required, but we were working closely with staff throughout that as well. Once it was constructed and passed inspections at that time, that was over 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago. And I don't know if you've received complaints. I'm not aware of any residents reaching out. It is it's substantially similar to the other infrastructure within, on that street and within the row. So I think is there any additional questions that you have that weren't answered? We know that there's more that we need to do, and we're ready to continue to work with staff to make sure that we check all the boxes.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Walker. With that said, any members in the audience for or against? I'll open public hearing.
William Prevotel, 11950 North Bay Shore Drive. I'll assume that being a Board of Adjustment item, that notice went to a 500-foot radius of everybody in the area of this meeting. So in light of that, there appear to be no objections if they have been sufficiently notified, and it sounds like they have been. I'd like to speak in support of the staff recommendation, and especially since this is an item that a structure that's already in place. But I'd like to add another item to your list of requirements, and that is that I did not necessarily hear of anything of a structural nature, of an engineering nature at this time, even though we saw a drawing. And Commissioner McDermott, I think rightly, expressed the question as to how did this happen and how was it filed and such. And I would like the board to make as one of their requirements to, one, verify the actual height that's in place. Could it be that actually 90 feet was submitted and 120 feet was built? Could it be that it's not really 120 feet, it's 130 feet? Whatever it might be, but to verify, physically get that certified and verify what the height is. Next is to, even though it was submitted recently, and certainly it went through engineering, but to, based on that verified height, for them to recertify the engineering for that. That the board is not held that, oh, we added this extra 30 feet and now something happens to it, it comes down, and how did we so casually agree to this, that you're covered that way. And furthermore, that in those structural calculations that it is verified that this is a loaded or fully loaded with equipment, piece of equipment. That it's not just a tower, but whatever they're proposing to put up there is part of the calculation that adds to the wind load, it adds to the downward load, and we don't want to assume one thing when something else can happen. And we start to get very high up, the overturn becomes a much greater concern. So with those, I hope with those additional considerations, I hope you'll be able to approve this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hill?
I wanted to do a slight amendment to the conditions, but I did want to note in response to the comment that condition number 2 requires an engineering report. So we would expect that all of what was just asked for would be certified to the city.
Except for the
That's
part
part of
that says about verifying the existing height, that it matches the.
Okay, we can
engineering.
add that.
Yeah.
So we had talked about the 6-month time period.
There is a history
So
in
at the
here, too.
beginning of the introductory paragraph, I would suggest adding the following language. It would be, that it's approval subject to the following conditions, all of which must be satisfied within 6 months of the issuance of the special exception and variances, or they would be declared null and void.
Yeah.
And failure to comply within 6 months shall cause this matter to be brought back before the board at an advertised public hearing for review and possible termination of the special exception and variances for failure to comply.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of self-executing declarations of null and void. I'd like to have a board
Yeah.
hear evidence on what was done and what wasn't done.
That's fine.
So,
Madam Chair?
Did you close public hearing?
Not yet.
Oh.
Public hearing is closed and board discussion. Go ahead, Mr. McDermott.
2 things to staff. Didn't we just have a zoning change in that area? Didn't the council just vote on extending the height in that area, I believe? Did they not?
Yes, the
LDRs?
overlay district has been introduced in that area on the east side of Northwest 7th Avenue that allows for heights up to 200 feet for,
Okay.
yes,
And residential as well, correct?
mixed use.
So it's now mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that change? Because if it's mixed use, which means residential, they're gonna be right on top of the tower. Because the land around it currently, now there are single-family homes, and I know staff, I'm sure, checked this out, but there are single-family homes along that track east of, now I don't know whether they've been converted to small businesses or what's going on, but I remember pretty clearly not too long ago that there were actually homes living, people living in structures in that in that area. So I'm assuming that the notices went out and I mean, but I know there were. And now, with the new change, you're gonna have that particular site surrounded possibly by residential.
Mr. Madeira, are you asking a question or are you making a statement on that?
I'm just,
sir?
both, really.
So
Um,
in a broad stroke, we do have you have the Chinatown overlay there. And with that, we have an overlay that has been introduced along that side, as I stated, that has allowed for mixed use to be introduced in that area, would allow for heights up to 200 feet. And yes, Mr. McDermott, you're correct. In time, in 20 years or so, we probably will have a robust area that you'll have the area that we're looking for, a true robust Chinatown with the articulation of the cultural elements that is associated with that and the heights that is associated, and we hope that that is coming. Now, is that going to happen tomorrow? I would like to have a project come in tomorrow, so taking advantage of that. But it's not anything has come to my attention as of yet. But yes, we're hopeful, and you are right. The vision is that you will have that in the future. You will.
So,
I have 2 questions, if I may.
Go ahead, Miss.
First of all, the closest residential house is across that I-95. Is that a house that's lived in? Is it?
yeah.
It's-
yeah,
It
there's-
is?
It's a residential
Okay.
area. Yes,
All
it's
right.
true. It's R1, R2 district over there.
Okay. And then, does anyone know what a typical lease duration is for one of these towers? I'm not really familiar with with this, but I did see every 2 years there will be a report given as part of the conditions. So I'm sure as we develop the West Side corridor, we'll be able to consider the impacts and the changes. However, I'm just wondering what a typical lease is. Is this like a 5-year lease? Is this a 99-year lease? Like what is normal for the city to do business with a cellular tower?
It is not limited. This is, as long as they are there, they have to be paying to be on the property.
Yeah, but
But that's something the city council could take into
yeah,
consideration.
so that's
when-
true. That can be determined by the council, and probably the council will take into consideration the plans for the future of that area.
Right.
So in a way, that kind of alleviates that responsibility from our plate.
Well,
And that wouldn't necessarily mean it's a decrease, would be a decrease in the need. If we take in
That's true, too.
consideration with what Michael says, it's might be an increase in the need for that particular thing, so,
We all need
If
to
you
use
have
our
one.
phones.
hey,
council,
that's what it is.
can,
Sir.
can we bundle these, or do we have to do one at a time?
Well, what we're doing is discussing them together, but we're gonna vote on them separately.
One at
Okay,
Okay.
so I can make a motion on one?
Yes, sir.
I think
Okay.
there's probably more discussion.
You know,
Any more discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I find it's sort of, if it were different circumstances, we might be voting differently. But being that it's already there, and it was really, anyway.
It's a business area.
In the first variance, which is V-4-19, I'd like to make a, I'm sorry,
Is there
Council.
a particular order that you think this should be done? Do the variances flow from the special exception?
Yeah, I think we should do the special exception
Right.
first, and because that is what generates the need for
The
the
ability
variances.
to vote on the other two.
Okay. hold on.
Okay.
So that would be,
The very first one.
yeah, V-4-19, right? Correct? Am I? Okay, the variance? I'd like to, yeah. I'd like
No,
to-
the special exception is V-3-19.
Correct.
Okay, all right, so, in V-3-19, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
Before you vote. So is that with the staff recommendation?
With the staff's
all
recommendations.
recommendation.
All
Uh,
of it.
Oh.
and with your your additions as well.
And
Right.
addition, verify the height of the existing tower,
Thank you, Bill, great input.
re-certify the engineering report, which is already condition number 2.
Right.
Yes.
Now, I just want to clarify, Mr. Cook, at one point you said 45 days for the lease as opposed to the 6 months. You're carving that out from the others, or?
That's correct. So for the lease agreement, the applicant needs to execute that within 45 working days from the date of your approval of your action here, which would be on or before May the 22nd.
So the time periods that we're saying, they should be like subject to extension upon request, and that extension should be something that staff, maybe we can say the city manager can grant, so it doesn't have to come to the
Yeah,
board.
45 days seems pretty short.
I
kind of
would agree with that.
Can we
but-
extend it so that because there's a lot of stuff going on in the city. I would definitely say rather than 45 days, why don't we give them 90 days?
So,
60.
Was that requested
60?
by?
60.
Okay, 60.
so to be clear, what I've stated, and Ms. Hill, if I may, through the chair, my apologies. So I've gave them, I said 45 working days, which is about 60 actual calendar days.
Oh.
But if you want to say 60
Yeah.
working days,
Do 60
Okay.
working days.
Yeah,
Well,
That
let's just
seems
do
a little
calendar
more.
days.
if you do 60 calendar
It's the
days, I think
same
that
thing.
puts it about the same.
Yeah.
But it's fine, that's fine.
Okay.
I don't have any objections, ma'am.
Let's just do
to what you're
60
saying.
working days.
Let's see what that is, if I
It's
may.
hard to get business in the city
Okay.
done that
so,
fast.
So
as maker
Oh,
of the
yeah.
motion, I'll,
Uh,
60
as maker of the motion, I'll
Working
accept
days?
that change.
working days.
working
Working
days.
days,
Yeah.
Because we've got elections coming up and all that kind of
I've been
thing,
through this
and May
recently
events
and
and
this
stuff, so.
doesn't go very fast, so let's just give them a little buffer
just-
zone.
I was just gonna say, it's easier to enforce a condition where you just have to look at the calendar and not count
And not the
the
working,
5 in the
yeah.
interval.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I do this all the
Do
time
you
with
do
the
that?
court.
You have an app for that? There's an
Yeah.
oh, you see?
It's easy.
Okay, so 60 working days.
Yeah.
So that would probably modify paragraph 1.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You wanna add your extras, Mike,
We can come up with some language later.
Okay.
with the motion?
Yes.
All right.
As stated.
As stated
As stated.
and modified.
Modified, right.
Everyone
right.
clear on what it is?
Yes,
Yep.
Okay.
we're clear. So roll call?
Ms. Philippe,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McDermott,
Yes.
Ms. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen.
Yes.
Motion has passed
Awesome.
5-0.
Okay. Now the next one,
Okay, so that would be V 1419, Derek?
V4 dash
V4?
19.
Next one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in V 4-19, I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? No. Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call?
Ms. Philippe,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McDermott,
Yes.
Ms. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen.
Yes.
Motion passed 5-0.
And last one, V dash 519.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. McDermott and seconded by Ms. Hill. Roll call, please.
Ms. Philippe,
Yes?
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. McDermott,
Yes.
Ms. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen. Motion passed 5-0.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, sir.
Now it's up to you and staff. All right, any old business? Yes, no?
I have new business.
New business,
Well, sort of
which
old.
is our ethics
Oh, yeah.
presentation.